For most of human history, the meta was simple. Get good with something sharp, wear something heavy, and hope your horses don't let you down. Spears and swords ruled close-quarter brawls. Bows and arrows offered a long-range perk, but only pros could reliably pierce heavy plate armor. This changed in the 9th century, when a new item took a massive dump over all the existing weapon pack. It didn't look like much at first glance, as it was just a mix of charcoal and sulfur, but once players figured out how to build it into their loadouts, the entire game shifted. All of a sudden, low XP players found themselves one-shotting knights. City walls were nerfed, while naval raids became long-range sniping matches. So, how did a single chemical reaction rewrite the history of warfare? Well, let's take a look at how gunpowder broke the meta. Gunpowder first spawned in the China server sometime around the 9th century during the late Tang Dynasty era. It was ironically discovered by Taoist alchemists when they were trying to brew an elixir of life. The alchemists instead unlocked a highly flammable compound that they called huoyao, or fire medicine. This new drop was initially unstable. The damage output was inconsistent, the ignition timing was too unpredictable, and initial formulas didn't even contain enough saltpeter to explode properly. Despite its unfinished state, it still offered a huge perk: psychological damage. In the 10th century, the Chinese realized they could beef up their arrows with gunpowder pouches to create fire arrows. These weapons didn't always deal effective damage, but they inflicted the terrified status on enemy players, with the earliest victims of this phenomenon being the people of Yuzhong, who faced fire arrows in 904 AD. As the Chinese server continued testing and iterating, gunpowder builds improved, and the weapon pack expanded to include the first fire lances and bombs. Fire lances were melee weapons with a temporary ranged burst ability. They were essentially spears with bamboo tubes containing gunpowder strapped to them. These lances could be unreliable at times, but they excelled at breaking formations and forcing enemy players out of position, as the Song found to their delight during the Jin Song Wars of the 12th century. The Jin players, eager to one-up their rivals, responded by developing iron bombs in the 13th century, which were said to cause the city walls to shake. By the mid-13th century, some fire lances were even shooting clusters of pellets, effectively functioning as the game's first shotgun-class weapons. This mod inspired the hand cannon by the end of the 13th century, challenging the meta with a metallic design that could directly launch projectiles at targets. For all its potential, however, gunpowder was still a regional gimmick at this point. Traditional melee and cavalry builds still dominated most large-scale battles, as hurling fire medicine remained a local strat instead of a global meta pick. That all changed when a new faction picked it up: the Mongols, who were deeply invested in speedrunning their conquest across Eurasia, decided to take the item on tour. As the Mongols pushed westward across Central Asia and into the Middle East, they carried gunpowder knowledge with them. They had seen firsthand what it was capable of while battling in China, notably in the form of thunderclap bombs during the siege of Kaifeng in 1232. Even though the Mongols came out on top, their health bars were severely affected. It wasn't surprising, therefore, that the Mongols nabbed their gunpowder recipes, bringing them to the Middle East in their invasion of Persia. And once the Islamic player base unlocked the item, they started studying and modding it. By the mid-13th century, for instance, Syrian chemist Hassan al-Ramah had recorded over 100 gunpowder recipes ranging from rockets to naval explosives. This doc helped the Mamluks, who started using cannons in 1342, and the Moors, who deployed similar weaponry when fending off Castilian troops in Spain. Having seen the damage dealt to their health bars, the European players doubled down to avoid trailing. This led to the development of the first cannons in medieval Europe, which were unreliable and very dangerous. The devs, however, remained hard at work, given the demand for advanced weapons in a server where war was constant. They eventually updated the game with a new feature in the late 14th century. This was the corning technique. Instead of storing the item as a loose powder, corning compressed it into small, uniform grains. With the corn status, gunpowder improved its defense stat against water and didn't separate as easily as finer versions during transportation. As a result, it no longer behaved like a dice roll and started dealing more consistent damage. In response to this engagement, the devs introduced a new role for these innovators: Master Gunsmith. In the 16th century, the growing number of gunsmiths improved the base stats of gunpowder weapons. The concept of one-size-fits-all powder was replaced by the practice of tuning grain size to specific weapon classes. This precision engineering was also applied to weapon design, with barrels, bores, and other firing mechanisms getting upgrades to improve the shot accuracy stat across the game. The result was safer and cheaper gunpowder weapons, which became easier to mass produce. Since more players had access to effective weaponry, skill expression shifted away from individual combat combat to coordination and formation tactics. After the first row of soldiers fired their muskets, the rearmost row would come up to the front to continue the assault, letting the previous row reload their guns for the next round. This tactic was not only enabling players to overwhelm opponents with consistent firing, but also activated simultaneous forward movement. The results of these formations proved that armies must provide as heavy a fire as possible to prevail. This was the new meta, encouraging governments to step in with state-controlled factories in the 17th and 18th centuries to centralize gun development. Gunpowder quality skyrocketed from that point onward, with entire national armies now capable of arming themselves with muskets, rifles, and cannons. With the mid-19th century update, devs introduced new explosive tech in the game. Even though players had mastered gunpowder by this point, they felt the item's weaknesses were impossible to ignore. For one, they were hit with the smoke penalty after each shot, temporarily blinding them in battle. Moreover, powder residue would lower the effectiveness stat of guns over time, making it difficult to hit targets. The update addressed these issues with the smokeless powder drop, which burned cleaner and generated more energy by using nitroglycerin. A popular build based on this item was the dynamite in 1867. Since it was safe and cheap to transport, dynamite was even used beyond battlefields by revolutionaries and anarchists. According to historian Stephen Bone, you can't roll up 12 barrels of black powder and have no one notice, as opposed to a tiny, triggered explosion in which all you need is a suitcase. Dynamite transformed terrorism like it did war and civil engineering. This transformation meant that gunpowder had to take a back seat. After World War I, most British gunpowder manufacturers merged into a single entity called Explosives Trades Limited, in a final attempt to consolidate what was left of the industry. Soon afterwards, the devs officially removed gunpowder as an in-game explosive, leading to a series of developments across active servers. By the update for the mid-20th century, only one gunpowder production site remained in the British server, the Ardere complex in Scotland, but it only held out till 1976. Just like that, the item that had once shattered the medieval meta and erased castle walls was now phased out of the game entirely.
Be gone!
It's important to note, however, that gunpowder wasn't nerfed into irrelevance. It simply reached the end of its tech tree after setting the stage for a new class of weapon. For nearly 1,000 years, gunpowder warped every system it touched. It invalidated heavy armor and erased long-standing fortress playstyles, forcing entire civilizations to rebuild their strategies from scratch. From the scary thunderclap bombs in China to the cannons used in medieval Europe.
Yank on it. Budget.
Gunpowder increased the damage stat of the traditional weapon pack. In the present day, for instance, we have modern firearms, grenades, and missile systems that no longer rely on black powder. They do inherit the core design philosophy of fire medicine though, which is converting chemical energy into controlled force. Modern firearms are the refined hit scan builds. They channel the energy of propellant chemicals into a single high-velocity projectile, giving it impressive precision, range, and reliability stats. Grenades, meanwhile, are the AoE descendants of early bombs. They may not have the best accuracy stat, but they more than make up for it with guaranteed splash damage. They use controlled detonation to clear space and punish clustered enemies, which is the same damage type dealt by firebombs on medieval battlefields. This damage stat, however, pales in comparison to that of missiles, which are the late-game evolution. They still rely on stored chemical energy, but now pair it with guidance systems and targeting logic. The result is high damage output at long range that doesn't require direct line of sight, making it one of the most overpowered weapons of our time. Gunpowder, therefore, introduced a new rule to the game that stored chemical energy, not human strength, would decide fights. Once that rule was added, the meta was never going back. So, to recap, gunpowder smashed the meta by changing what stats actually mattered. On its own, early gunpowder was already strong. Even in its buggy alpha state, it introduced splash and psychological damage into a meta that had never been balanced around any of those mechanics. It was inconsistent and hard to use, but still powerful enough to force players to adapt. What pushed it over the edge was optimization. Once players started modding it and built entire systems around it, gunpowder became the default win condition. It hard-countered elite warriors, castles, and cavalry builds. Skill expression shifted away from individuals and toward coordination and production. After evolving it into the smokeless form and gaining upgrades in the form of guidance systems and industrial manufacturing, the results were completely unfair to play against. So, while early gunpowder might have ranked somewhere in the B- to A tier, it became legitimately cracked once it scaled into modern firearms and missiles. That's why, as a tech tree rather than a single item, Gunpowder earns a permanent S-tier ranking.